Welcome to the War in Heaven. I'm Austin Hepworth. I'm here along with Michael Hepworth. Today we are going to talk about some of the spiritual hazards of fault finding. And this is an interesting topic to me. The other day, as I was looking at some headlines, sometimes I scroll headlines, sometimes even click on them, I guess, to read some news stories. But as I was going through, something really hit me about how many of the headlines were, in essence, gossip. And it wasn't even, not even reading just pure entertainment news or anything. Um, but so much of it, there'd be, have you seen this? Here's a funny video, but it's usually of someone's misfortune. Um, or there'd be, this politician said this, or they believe this. And in the political realm, there was so much negativity, so much discussion back and forth about this person, that person, all these types of things. And it really, really hit me. Again, just thinking, wow, there's a lot of gossip going on here, a lot of discussion with a very negative spirit to it. And of course, it's important in life for us to be able to understand right and wrong. We need to be able to discuss right and wrong. But the thing I believe strongly about life, and if we go to the War in Heaven and look at it, there were different principles, different spirits at battle with each other. God had a plan for life, and he had principles associated with life. He became the being that was working to carry that into effect. Satan, on the other hand, pursued some principles of darkness and death, and he became the head of that, the being promoting and pushing those. And so each of these things has a very strong, powerful spirit behind it, one that it can do quite a bit. Obviously, Satan doesn't have all the same things God has, but we can see in this world how many bad things go on. We can see the spirit of evil and the strength it can have at times. And ultimately, when we're viewing the world, when we're making judgments, when we're talking, when we're trying to discern and learn and do different things, it can be coming from one of the two sources, the spirit of death or the spirit of life. And I probably mentioned this a couple times, but I think it's always worth repeating that a good old Indian tale, I think, that highlights this is where an old Indian's telling a young Indian, saying, be careful about your actions and your choices because there's two wolves at battle inside you. One's good and one's bad, and both are battling for control of your soul. And the young Indian, after listening for a minute, said, well, how do I know which one will win? And the wise Indian said, it depends on which one you feed. And so when we're talking today about fault finding, we are talking about the type of judgment or focus or searching that comes kind of from this spirit of darkness, from the negative side of things. And there's some ways we can start to wrap our minds around it somewhat. But ultimately, there are righteous ways to discern good from evil. I can look at something, for example, I can say, you know what, I'm not interested in smoking. It causes cancer, makes my body not as healthy, not my thing. And I can elect not to do that. I can do that from a good spirit, from a humble spirit. But if I then take that and then start to say, oh, someone that smokes is a bad person or something, I'm starting to get into fault finding. I'm starting to make judgments about a person because of an action. And people are way more complex than one action or even a series of repeated actions. There's a lot more to them. And we as a people, I think, I don't know if it's laziness, I don't know if it's a desire to understand or what it is exactly, but we quickly assign labels of this is a good person or this is a bad person. Well, every good person has some bad attributes or actions they undertake sometimes, and every bad person probably has something good they do occasionally. There may be some small exceptions to those where truly no one does anything good anymore, or someone maybe gets to the point where they never do anything bad. But for most of us, we're somewhere in between that. And life is much more complicated and nuanced than being able to just put something in a headline or make an assumption or assume that we know what's really going on or what a person's thinking or what they intended. But when we start to put ourselves into that place of fault finding and focusing on those faults and assigning some type of blame or judgment with it, we are losing our access to life itself. We're starting to be cut off from the very thing that we came here to pursue, which was life. And this focus, this negativity, this feeding of the dark spirit causes us to start to, I believe it literally warps our ability to see reality, even. We start to believe some things that are very false, that are very far out, and they become very real to us. They feel very real. And so today we wanted to talk about in detail about some of the specifics that go on, about some of the effects it has, so that we can be able to recognize when we may be engaged in fault finding or gossip in an inappropriate way, to be able to recognize this isn't the right spirit. I'm not approaching this the right way. I need to switch back to a good spot so that I'm not feeding this. I don't want this to grow. I don't want to go down this path. And one thing that I've told my children quite repeatedly, and something I very strongly believe, is I tell them that if you feel angry inside, don't make a decision at that point, because anger always lies to you. There's always something it's made up. It doesn't mean that the whole thing is made up. There's a lot of things that were true that happened, but there's a piece of it that always lies to you when you're angry. And I believe very strongly that if we see things as they truly are, the good and the bad, we feel different than we do in a moment of rage or anger. And I believe it's the same with fault finding. When we fault find, we are suddenly shutting out certain facts and realities, and it has a significant impact on us spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally, socially. It really starts to place limits around what's possible in our existence here. So it's very important that we learn, again, to recognize when we're fault finding, try and break out of it, and try and see things through a more comprehensive lens, to see both the good and the bad, to see the nuances for what they are, and recognize that this life is complex. We're journeying, we're trying to get somewhere. We're made up of good and bad parts, but we're all on this journey together. And so we can give each other a little bit of grace, a little bit of mercy, and not be so judgmental and harsh on the way that we come across with our fellow travelers. Michael, do you have any comments for us as we start on this discussion?
Yeah, I like how you discussed the good and evil that's in all of us. It goes back to, I've quoted a few times, Alexander Solzhenitsyn saying that the line that divides good and evil runs through every human heart. It's not a matter of different groups or different peoples. You can't look at a group of people and say, that's where all the evil is. Let's destroy them. Let's get rid of them, and then we'll destroy evil. It's something that happens in all of our hearts. And as we focus on the negativity around us, we focus on the bad around us, the evil around us, it kind of shields us from seeing that own evil in our own hearts. In the Bible, it talks about the beam and the mote. You're seeing the mote in somebody's eye, but you have the beam in your eye, and it's really blocking your view. And it's understandable too, because to look inside your own heart is, I guess you call it a terrifying enterprise sometimes. You can be surprised by the things you might find inside yourself, and you can be worried or scared and wish maybe you didn't see those things inside yourself. And so it's easier to look around and see negativity or evil elsewhere, so you don't have to focus on your own. That there's Daniel Defoe wrote a book called The History of the Devil. He was the author of Robinson Crusoe. At the beginning of it, he said, bad as he is, the devil may be abused by falsely charged and causelessly accused. When men, unwilling to be blamed alone, shift off these crimes on him, which are their own. We like to look outside and say, the devil is causing evil, or those other people around us are evil, but we don't look to ourselves. And it's easy sometimes. I think it was in the book The Hiding Place, Corey Ten Boom, who wrote that, said that this is the great plan of the evil one to display such blatant evil around us that we could believe that our own secret sins didn't matter. So when you look back to the war in heaven, and the purpose of that was to come here and be agents and be choosing and make our own path back to our Heavenly Father with the help of Christ. And as we seek to shift that and do not look at our own secret sins and look at the evil all around us, we're giving up that agency of improving ourselves and becoming something ourselves. And we look around and say, it's the problem's outside of me. When in reality, if we go back to our purpose in coming here, it was us becoming something. So the problem is always inside us. There's always something that we can work on inside us. That doesn't mean that there aren't things around us that we can also work on and help. But that means that your outlook has to be balanced. It has to be able to identify the good and bad around you and the good and bad inside yourself, so that you are at balance with reality. You don't have a beam that's preventing you from seeing the things you can improve on, or that's preventing you from seeing the good around you. It can lead to a lot of hopelessness if all you do is focus on negativity. And so we need to look at not shifting that outside of us, but trying to keep that inside and keep the balanced view.
Yeah, I really like that. To look inside, because one of the things that fault finding does to us is it placates our conscience in a way. We start to look around, and as long as someone else is doing it a little worse than us, we justify ourselves in it and say, okay, well, I don't do that much. I don't watch that much TV, because someone else watches more than me. And I've been interested by the approach we often take in life, where we judge our own moral standing or position based off of our comparisons to others. And I think fault finding is a way for us to feel justified in wherever station or situation we're in or at, because someone else is doing it worse. If you have the who wore it better contest, fault finding is kind of the who wore it worse contest. And we're focused on this because we're trying to appease a part of our own conscience. And give you two examples. One is, I remember talking to a guy once, and he said, well, I'm honest in all my dealings. And I said, well, what does it mean to you to be honest? And he said, well, I perfectly follow the law. So whatever the law says, I do. Therefore, I'm honest in everything. And I remember saying, but there's some aspects of law that allow people to get away with something that's not honest. I said, so if your position is that you follow the law and you are therefore honest or moral or good, saying then you're assuming that the law is moral, honest, and good. And it was interesting for me because there's a lot of people that I meet that believe that as long as they're a good person, they'll never have a legal issue. And there's people that believe they're a good person because they follow the law. And there's quite a few of that judgment out there. And I go, wait, these are things where we're making a comparison. We're saying, oh, because I follow the law, I'm a good person. Well, is the law good? Are we delving into those details, into those depths? Or do we have our own definition of good? Are we just shifting our responsibility to say, well, good's defined by the law, so I will, therefore look at that. The other one was in my religion, we have a principle. We have some principles associated with health and well-being, and one of them says that we should eat meat sparingly. And when I ask people, what does it mean to you to eat meat sparingly? Most don't really have a definition for how much meat that is. But if I say, are you eating meat sparingly? Virtually everyone I meet says yes. You say, well, how do you know if you don't know for sure what sparingly means? They say, well, I eat less than so-and-so. And it's this thing continually where we try and find our place and our identity by saying, well, It said sparingly, so some people eat it this much, therefore I must be sparingly because I'm not eating that much. And to me, the point of that example is when I come and I find fault, what I'm doing is I'm essentially saying that I'm doing something okay because someone else did it wrong. And there's this part of me inside that's quite often justifying my own actions. And there's some quotes that talk about how sometimes the things that we find the most fault with are things that we're trying to hide inside ourselves. They're things that exist inside of us. And so this is an aspect where I know for me, it's been very helpful to look at my life and say, what do I judge people on? What do I get super critical on? And then ask, how is that inside me? What is it that I'm trying to appease in my conscience? And it's fascinating to see how much that's shown me about myself. Rather than finding fault in someone, just to step back and say, I have a desire to find fault here. So what is it that I'm covering up in myself? And use that as a mirror to see back inside me. And to your point, Michael, what's inside isn't always pleasant. We have to deal with the reality that there's some bad things inside of us. We have to work on those. But when we go through and fault find, it can be, I'm not saying that all instances of fault finding are this, but it can be a way for us to justify our own actions, to continue on in the course we're in and to refuse to change. And that significantly stalls our spiritual progress and it significantly limits what we're capable of because we're allowing the bad inside of us, that darkness, to stay there, to grow with us believing it's not even there. That's one of the crazy things about fault finding is the darkness inside of us, we'll see it in others, we'll project and we're like, ooh, there it is, there it is, there it is. But then we never turn that gaze inwardly and we never see it in us. And then it just sits there and it grows. And we become part of the problem as we fault find because we become blind to what's inside of us. We're just looking outwardly for that. Michael, do you have any thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, I really like that point because if you take it to the next step, you think I am basing my judgment on myself based on what I see around me. And if I determine I'm better than those around me, then I've decided I'm doing enough. But if we think about the purpose of being here on this earth, it's not a race where we try to be the first one to a certain level of morality. Um, that's supposing that you somehow know all the good choices and bad choices other people are making, and you're accurately looking at yourself. The point of this was, what are you becoming, and how are you growing closer to God? And that doesn't depend on anybody around you. So to look around you and say, well, I don't make that sin, and I'm not doing that thing that I see over there, so I'm probably in pretty good shape, is the wrong metric to gauge your progress. Your progress needs to be based on yourself. Am I better today than I was yesterday? As the general idea. Obviously, things don't change overnight, but that's kind of the general rule. What am I doing today to try to overcome my weaknesses of yesterday instead of saying, well, I'm just better than those around me, so therefore I must be in pretty good shape. We've got to judge that rubric on how are we returning to God, not are we just beating others in the race around us. That most of the time when we think we're better than others around us, we probably aren't. So there's that to consider. But the other piece is, even if you are better than those around us, that doesn't do you a whole lot of good if you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And so our rubric should be looking to ourselves and saying, are we better? Are we improving? Not, are we doing better than those around us?
Yeah. And the Apostle Paul in the Bible from Romans 2:1, he mentions this. He says, thou art inexcusable, O man, whosoever thou art that judgest. For wherein thou judgest another, thou condemnest thyself. For thou that judgest doest the same things. And we're talking judging unrighteously, judging from this negative spirit side of things. Because again, it's essential to, judge and say, yeah, I don't want that in my life. Yep, I'm going to do something different. We can learn from the mistakes of others without condemning them, without feeling superior to them. And one of the things that fault finding does is it satiates our pride. Pride exists only when we can have a comparison that exists. Pride is all about the comparison. And fault finding is a comparative action that feeds the pride and keeps pride in control. So pride is always looking for us to elevate ourselves above someone else. And when we fault find, we're essentially lowering them and lifting up ourselves in our own eyes. And the fascinating thing about pride is it's a reality that we purely created for ourselves. And we live in this reality of, oh, I'm special because I say I'm special, and I found 1,000 instances of someone that's doing, not as good as me or whatever. And it's this fascinating thing that we experience in this life. And again, one of the reasons why we so quickly turn to pride as a source of our identity is because we have to have faith and exercise faith without pride. Pride is a faithless action. It's easy because it's what our eyes see. We can just look at something and say, better, worse, better, worse. We can always be comparing. To pull out of pride actually takes faith. It takes believing that there's a God, there's something bigger, we have an identity, we have a purpose, and that's not based in how I stack up in the way that, the things we can see with our eyes. My identity is not based in how fast I can run, and or how many dollars I can earn or whatever it is. My identity, my worth is based on something else, and that takes faith. Without that faith, though, we turn to pride, and pride's a universal sin. We've all experienced it because it's so easy. But fault finding is one of the foremost tools for keeping pride in our hearts. It's how we exercise our pride. We start to go through and be super critical. And it's interesting, as we start to go through and be super critical, what happens is there's two things that happen. It limits our ability to see and understand. The more critical we become and the more we find fault, the less we can actually comprehend. And the second thing that happens is we start to create our own prison. We create a reality that's incredibly confining and that's incredibly restrictive of agency. And so in our world, so if we go through those two things of fault finding, limiting our perception and ability to understand, when we focus on the faults over and over and over again, we start to see them. And we start to miss everything else that's going on in life. You may see this come across if you have a child that works really hard to clean up for you, and they're excited, you're coming home, you walk in the house, and they've done a pretty good job. They've cleaned up a lot. There was a lot on the floor, a lot of dishes, whatever. And you walk in and say, what about those three? And that's all you see. And you miss the fact that they worked for 6 hours and that they're a little kid. You won't feel the love. You won't see their intent. You won't see everything. You'll just say, you missed 3 things. And that can be crushing. It can damage that relationship. But over and over, as you start to see those things, you create pathways in your mind. And your mind becomes very good about focusing in on the mistakes. And you start to miss the good things. You start to miss everything else taking place. And your world starts to become defined by the 3 dishes that were missed by your child rather than the 97 dishes that were done. And it's an incredibly skewed way to see the world. And before we go on to the second one, talking about the prison it kind of creates, Michael, do you have thoughts on that or comments on our distorted perception?
Just one. Just gonna give a quote from Jeffrey R. Holland. He spoke about our words and the impact they have in our lives. But he said this about negativity. He said, I suppose it goes without saying that negative speaking so often flows from negative thinking, including negative thinking about ourselves. We see our own faults. We speak, or at least think, critically of ourselves, and before long, that is how we see everyone and everything. No sunshine, no roses, no promise of hope or happiness. Before long, we and everybody around us are miserable. that's kind of what I see in what you're saying is it can begin with seeing our own faults or seeing the faults of those around us, but pretty soon that's just how everything is viewed. And at that point, you hear people say, well, nothing's going to work. It's all going to fall apart. And it's just up to others to make it better. It's not going to work for me. And so if it's just all negativity, that's all we're going to see, then we've created a prison in our own lives, and that's how we're going to live the rest of our lives.
Yeah, and that's something that it's fascinating to me how much our mind plays into the world we see and experience, the life we have. It is so powerful in shaping that. And as I've looked at the fault finding side, the judgment side, I've really learned that my judgments create fear inside me. What I send out, the way that I filter everything that comes in, the lens I see it through, starts to change and impact what I think everyone else is thinking about me. And my perception of what I think people are thinking about me starts to define my experience on this in this life. And so to give an example, I think it's one I've talked about before as well, but I, for a while, was super critical and judgmental about people that sang if they weren't just perfect. And the fascinating thing to me in life was that I was terrified to sing in public. It was one of my biggest fears. And for whatever reason, it was one of my harshest judgments. And once I eventually learned that my judgment, my harsh judgment of saying someone was so horrible for trying to sing that wasn't just perfect, caused me to have my own prison walls. I created such a fear inside me that I couldn't bring myself to sing in public. And that was really interesting for me to start to create the connection between my fears of society and of man. When I say man, the humans we interact with, to say, I'm afraid of what people think. And it was causing me to have fear because I was judging someone else. And I started to learn that I can look at myself and say, well, what am I afraid of doing? Would I be afraid of saying this publicly? If so, there's probably in me some level of judgment I'm casting or fault I'm finding as it relates to somebody else. And if I, for example, say, well, that person doesn't have their hair done today, which is usually my case. My hair is usually not done. I just do a buzz cut, because I don't know what to do with it. But if I were judgmental about that and said, well, that person doesn't know how to do their hair, and I was critical inside and found fault with them from this negative spirit side of things, I then become afraid to go outside without my hair done. And it becomes limiting. I start to create this prison inside me because I assume that the world is viewing me the same way. And this is one of the fascinating things about our judgments. The judgments we send out, we assume everybody else cares about and judges the same things, which makes us then act in accordance with our own judgments. If our judgments, again, are limiting, if they're fault finding, they create a prison. They restrict our agency because we become so fearful. And no, we're never going to do that. I can never say that. I can never sing in public. Whatever it is that we're judgmental about, can't go out with my hair done, whatnot. We can free ourselves from these things. We can free ourselves from the fear of others and what they think by changing what we think about people. And the key to combating fault finding isn't to believe that everything is roses. You can still recognize there's roses and thorns and all those things, but you can see the complete picture. But the real key is just to have charity and really have a love for people, to say, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. If I have to assume something to fill in a gap, I don't know why they said that. I don't know why they did that. Maybe they're trying their best. Maybe they're hurt. Maybe they don't understand what I've been through in life through no fault of their own, because maybe I've never shared it. There's so many things that can explain what people do. And if we give people the benefit of the doubt, if we have charity, we can just love. Charity doesn't mean that we don't see the faults, that we don't see problems, but it means we don't define people by it. And when we don't define people by it, we remain free. We have the highest level of agency possible because we're not afraid of other people. We extend charity and grace to them, and we believe they'll extend it back. And maybe they all won't. Maybe some will be super judgmental and critical. But I found that the better I get at this, the less someone else's judgment or criticalness matters to me. It's just a thought in their mind, that's all. And it doesn't define me. It doesn't, make me a bad or good person. It just is a thought. And I'm much more than a thought. And someone's thought of me doesn't have to influence my identity, because the more I can have charity for others, the more I can have it for myself, and I can recognize we're all the same. We're all children of God. I don't need to go to pride to find my identity. I can find my identity in seeing other humans as fellow travelers on this walk, as children of God. And this is how we can start to work to free ourselves from the prisons we create, or that fault finding creates, and just to be able to exercise the most agency, have the most freedom. Michael, what thoughts do you have on those things?
I was thinking, as you talk about making ourselves prisoner, you can also look at the effect it has on those around you. So it's obviously stifling to you and your progress, but through fault finding, through your negativity. Think about what also it does to those around you. It makes their world just as negative. The more you're negative, they have to participate in your negativity because they have to hear about it or read it or whatever the case is. And it becomes that much harder for everybody to just try to be positive. And so your negativity will really bleed out to those around you. It affects you. It affects those around you. We can look at the Bible. You can look at James in the Bible, and he talked about the power that our words have. He said, "For in many things we offend all, but if any man offend not in word, the same is a perfect man, and able also to bridle the whole body. That behold, we put bits in the horses' mouths, that they may obey us, and we turn about their whole body. Behold also ships, which though they be great and are driven by fierce winds, yet they are turned about with a very small helm. And he said that the tongue is also a little member, but behold how great a forest a little fire can burn." So in the end, he says that we need to tame our tongue, because of the effect it has on us, the effect it has on those around us. It can burn an entire forest. It's a little flame. The things we say, the things we write, have a huge effect. They're going to affect our future. They're going to affect those around us. And so it's both for good and bad. If we decide to fault find, to gossip, to be negative, that's the way the world's going to turn out. That's all we're going to see. That's what people around us are going to start to see. It's easy to participate in negativity. It's hard to stop that stem of negativity. But conversely, if we go out and we're positive and we are looking for the best in people, and that's not to be blind to problems. That is to reach out to others, as you said, with charity, to understand that there's good and bad in all of us, and to choose to look for the good and to choose to point out the good, so that when there is something that needs work, something needs fixing, whether it's in you or those around you, it's buoyed up by so much good that's been recognized. It's like, we can handle this thing. There's this one thing we've figured out that we need to fix because everything else is going so well. We're doing a lot of good things. We can focus on these little things. We can make it better. So there's a lot of power in what we say and in what we write. And you can see that in social media. You can see that through the 24-hour news cycle. There's so much negativity that comes through the news, that comes through social media. The positive gets really drowned out. There's not a lot of it. It's easier to feed into that negativity. And so we have to make a conscious effort. It's something that takes work. because it's not as easy to be positive as it is to be negative. It's easier to point and to say these things are wrong than it is to look around and say this is all that's going right, and let's encourage people and make people feel better.
Yeah, I think it's very true that it is more difficult to be positive, but it's also much more rewarding. Like you point out with the negativity side, it's the easy path, but it leads to a lot of unhappiness in our life and a lot of captivity. If you view it the same as eating, yeah, it's easier to eat out. It's easier to eat unhealthy. Even healthy eating takes more work. It's not as much fun, not as tasty, but it has real impacts on our body over time. And over time, more and more unhealthy eating leads to loss of agency in the sense that we don't have as many decisions to make anymore. We may not be able to go do things we want to do or to participate or be as active with our kids or different things if our bodies aren't healthy. And it's the same for our soul. And I like how you talk about the impact on others too. Our negativity really can bring people down. And it really does have an impact on people. And this is one of the places where I just go back to when we talk about who we are and our impact on the world. We, I think, seriously underestimate how far out a chain of negativity could go. If I come across as super mean to someone one day, going to work, yell at them, and then they go home and yell at their kid, and their kid goes to school and yells at someone at school, that chain can continue for a long, long time. There can be a lot of anger and frustration there. And it's the same with my negativity. If I come in and insult someone, I'm negative, tear them down, so I can pretend to build myself up, they will experience negativity. And that generally, it rarely stays with the person. It's going to be spread and shared. And I think if we could actually see how far our negativity impacted people from circle to circle to circle, we'd probably be appalled. But on the flip side, our belief, our actions are good things. They can carry too. They can lift people up. They can do things. And when we want to change our world, when we want to do things, maybe some of the ways to do it is to not consume as much of the negativity. You know, the algorithms track what we click on. If we're here, this is something that's an interesting thing to think about. We often blame the news for the negativity. But on the news, if there were two stories that popped up, one right next to the other, both headlines sitting there, and one said, dad stays true to his wife and kids for 40 years, works really hard, retires, and is grateful to God for his blessings, versus father of 5 shoots and kills wife and children. Most of us are probably going to pick on the one that's more negative, more shocking. And the algorithms see that. And so then the news as a business has to produce more and more of that content. They get more and more nitpicky. They get down to where they're just nitpicking the stupidest things, finding fault with the stupidest things. Anything a politician says gets picked apart. These types of things. And I go, this isn't healthy at all for any of us. We have to realize that we're feeding this monster by what we click on. We're not just even consuming these things in private, because the algorithm knows and then dictates what the businesses are going to create and make more of. And we can change that by starting to click and interact with different things. If someone posts something positive, click on it, feed the algorithm. And it's fascinating to see how quickly your feeds, your other things can start to change if you start to feed different things to the algorithm. You'll start to see different things. I tested this for myself on Facebook. I started making a conscious effort. Whenever there was anything remotely positive, I would like it, interact with it, click on it, something like that, because I wanted to see how quickly Facebook would change my feed. I was finding that I didn't like getting on there because it was so negative. And lo and behold, it was fascinating to realize I was the one clicking on the negative things. That's what I was interacting with. And within 3 or 4 days of me intentionally pursuing other things to appear in my feed, my whole feed changed. And it wasn't negative anymore. And this is something that, again, I'm assuming from the privacy of my home, I can read an article, something doomsday-ish, or not even doomsday in that sense, just meaning the sky is falling, like, oh, how horrible everything is, see it politically, whatever. When I listen to, sorry, totally spaced my mind right now, political talk show hosts. And I actually stopped listening for this reason. I tuned in for a time, but every time I'd walk away after listening to political talk shows, I was filled with negativity. They were angry, and they were peddling that anger and that negativity. And I realized I don't want this in my life. I'm not going to go to these political talk show figures to feed me information when they're putting such a negative spin on it. Because again, going back to my discussion with my children at the start, that anger, that negativity, there's a lie in there somewhere. That's how darkness moves forward, is it keeps out a piece of light. It doesn't disclose the good that was going on. It keeps that out. It cuts out the light side of it and just focuses on the dark. But that's a lie, because it's not that simple and clear cut. There's light mixed in. There's maybe something bad mixed in. But we have to see it completely. And if we see things with the light side and the dark side and we don't cut either one out, we're going to have a realistic view of life. We can make better decisions. But when we participate in things that feed us just this dark, just this anger, just this fault, it's cutting out light. It's lying to us. And for me, I've found that whenever I start to feel that negative spirit, that angry spirit approaching things, or associated with an article or the way someone's talking, it's a very clear flag to me that something's missing. There's a piece of the story not being shared or being shared incorrectly. And it's helped me be able to try and better identify or go searching for the other side of the story. When I find intense anger in the way people are talking online, I go look at the other side of the story, and it's fascinating to see the pieces that are being left out. And we can do that, we can be intentional about it, but we have to realize that fault finding is a problem. It distorts our perception. It distorts our reality, the thing that we view as reality with the things that we experience. It leads us to prison, in essence, by trapping us in our own judgments and in our own negative outpouring, and it harms those around us, especially those we love, our family, our spouses. If we're always critical of a spouse, always tearing them down, they don't feel loved. Same as with a child. We have to be able to accept that there's good associated with so much of what they're doing. We have to see that. We have to appreciate that and respect that as well. Michael, do you have any final thoughts for us?
Yeah, I was just thinking perhaps an interesting way to look at this is through driving on the road. When I was going to college, I drove delivery trucks every day, 8 to 10 hours a day of driving. And my wife always told me while I was working there, I was a very angry driver whenever I was when we drove somewhere. Something about being on the road all day and what I was focusing on made me rather an angry person when I was driving. And I've thought a lot about that over the years as I drive. And I think talking to people about driving on the road, if they tell you about an experience, it's usually, I saw this crazy thing happen, this person cut me off, or this person did something terrible, and rarely do you hear somebody say, this person let me in. Because that does happen. But we don't talk about those experiences. And in fact, if you're driving somewhere, I commute about half an hour to work every day. And if on the way in I have somebody cut me off, that's what I remember when I arrive at work. And I might arrive in a rather negative state. And I forget that there were another 1,000 cars on the road with me that didn't cut me off. It's just what I chose to focus on. That was what made the impact in my mind. And so that I think is that fault finding, that negativity, that spirit of fault finding. There is, we do sometimes focus on the bad instance, and we forget about all the other good things that happen. We let that then affect our mood. And then we show up to work and we're in a bad mood and we're negative, and we complain about something, and somebody hears that and they go complain about something and it's just a chain. Whereas we could say, yes, this person made a poor decision on the road, but look at all these other people that didn't. There's lots of people that didn't make poor decisions. And I got to work safely and everything was fine. And I can be a little more positive and not be so much in fault finding. And so it really comes down to what we're choosing to focus on. And that's going to be how we view life. Like you said with Facebook, with Facebook, it's a very active choice. What do I click on? What do I view? That's the way it is with social media a lot. And it's the same with our lives. What do we choose to talk about? What do we dwell on? That can really have an effect on our own outlook on life and those around us.
Yeah, and it's, the focus of our life, I think, becomes our reality. And it's just this thing of saying, do you want to focus on the faults? Is that what you want to remember from this life? Is everything that was wrong? Or do you want to remember everything that was right? And the other morning I woke up and I looked out the window, and this year in Utah, in the valley I live in, we have not had a lot of snow. The mountains have still got some, they're still skiing, but the valley itself has had very little. But I remember looking out and actually seeing snow on the rooftops and some snow on the grass. Still wasn't enough to cover all the grass. But it really hit me because I tend to be negative about the snow. I don't love to shovel and all that. But I remember this thought crossing my mind, and it said, Austin, it snowed. The earth is still working like it should be. Find the miracle in that. Look for the good in that type thing. It was telling me, don't see snow as this burden. See it as, hey, the world's still working. There's hope for today because the sun still rose, the snow still fell, there's still water, there's still these things. And I look at that and I think that was such a simple reminder to me, but also very profound to me to say, I often get overwhelmed focusing on all the bad, and all the things I have to do, and all the stressors and the potential things out there I got to deal with. But I'm missing the whole fact that I'm alive. I'm in this amazing world. There's these sunsets and there's these sunrises daily. They're beautiful. The trees, the flowers, the snow, it's all beautiful. And I can miss all of that experience in life, the sheer wonder of it, because I'm too obsessed with the fact that someone didn't say hi to me, or the fact that somebody wore their clothes a little differently, or that a politician said this or that. And I let these things ruin my whole experience here. We're here to experience life. God gave us this amazing planet, this amazing world, this amazing earth. Can we walk with some gratitude in our hearts rather than the spirit of fault finding? Can we be grateful for the good things and then enjoy the experience here, no matter what it throws at us? I think we can. We can wake up with wonder to see the sunrise every day. We can wake up filled with appreciation and awe for the miracle of life, for all the animals, for us as humans, for all the things we've created and done. There's so much that's gone right in this world. Far outweighs what's gone wrong. And we need to remember that and focus on that. And that's the story of life. That's the story of the war in heaven, is that, yeah, some things will go wrong, but the good things are going to outweigh and outnumber the bad. And in the end, if we choose to hold on to that good, we can continue to hold on to it, build with it, accumulate it. And our world can become better, our lives can become better, the lives of those we love can become better. Let's embrace the good. Let's stop focusing so much on the negativity and the faults, and to get back to enjoying life, get back to seeing life for what it is and the miracle that it is. So we appreciate you guys joining us today as we talk about these things, and we hope that you can make a conscious effort to consume less negativity, consume less bad, consume more inspirational things. There's actually millions of inspirational things people have created. So many good things out there. Consume those, put those into your heart, into your mind, and it will radically change the way you feel, radically impact those around you, and help you be more free and more capable of seeing life for what it really is. So thanks for joining us today, and we will talk more next week.